how do you explain the accounts of the miracles and the miraculous things that he did, witnessed and purported by people in the area at that time?
How do you explain the miracles that Joseph Smith did? There were witnesses where Joseph Smith received gold plates from the angel Moroni, and that only happened in the 19th century. Like, how do you explain that? Like, why aren't you a Mormon? Is that a fair question?
Well, I mean, partially, but, if in fact, if there wasn't just one or two, I mean, we're talking about big things like a resurrection from the dead.
Satya Sai Baba, who did not die that long ago in India, resurrected the dead, healed the blind, performed miracles in front of thousands of people. He has 30 million followers right now who are alive, who will swear to this. Why don't you believe that? There's so many people who used to hate me. And I get this very interesting email every day from different people so I said, I used to hate your guts. And one guy wrote to me and said, I thought you were the Antichrist. He wrote me an email today. And I just want you to know I love you and I used to hate you. And I researched it finally. And, God does that with people where he takes a heart of stone and turns it into a heart of flesh.
Welcome to TaNaCh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live out of Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Rabbi Tovia Singer's Let's Get Biblical Q&A, coming to you live from Israel. The man, the myth, legend, Rabbi Tovia Singer. Welcome back. How are you this lovely day?
It's a pleasure to have me on.
It sure is.
And
thanks for speaking for all of us. I appreciate that.
Yeah, always a joy to.
Very good.
Yeah.
So tell us exactly what we're fixing to encounter.
Yeah, so this is very interesting. So, we've all heard of Joe Rogan, who has a very successful podcast. Not as big as yours, but as big.
Hey, from your lips to Hashem's ears.
Yeah. So, right. And a person who most people wouldn't be familiar with, myself included, is Wes Huff, who's a Christian apologist who I have not heard of prior to his appearance on Joe Rogan. And he did a more than 3-hour interview with Joe. And for Rogan, that's fairly typical. And essentially, he sought to defend the Christian religion. And there are many people who have commented on it, and I think it's important to identify some features of the interview. It goes into different areas, but I think it's important for us to focus on the core tenet of the Christian religion, that Jesus died and rose on the third day according to the scripture. And Wes goes into this quite a bit. So we're going to go into some pieces on this, but I need to say this because apparently no one else has said this, and because there's an elephant in the room. We're going to discuss elements of this, but there's a feature of this which no one else has noticed, and that is there is no prophecy anywhere in the Hebrew Bible that the Messiah is supposed to die and rise on the third day. It doesn't exist. It's invented. In fact, it's a classical example. It's a classic example of the Christian Bible inventing verses that just don't exist. For example, 1 Corinthians chapter 15. For those of you who have even a perfunctory familiarity with Paul's epistles, that's perhaps the most famous. In verse 4, Paul has the audacity to claim that Jesus rose on the third day according to the scripture. There is no such scripture. It doesn't exist. Now, missionaries frequently point to Hosea chapter 6, but Hosea 6 is talking about Ephraim, not talking about the Messiah. Read it always in context. Luke, no doubt, the author of the third gospel, is copying from Paul. It's not word for word, but whoever wrote the book of Luke, the end of Luke, the last chapter, it's a fairly long chapter, 44 through 46, again, the claim is made that if you look at the Torah, the prophets, and writings, you'll find that it is prophesied that the Messiah would die and rise on the third day. Well, guess what? It isn't there. So we're going to be talking a bit about Wes's claims on Joe Rogan's show, because it's really eye-opening. However, the biggest piece here is that the Messiah is not supposed to die and rise on the third day. There is nothing like this. So we are discussing a topic with an elephant in the room. And then there's no prophecy like this anywhere in the Hebrew Bible. The Messiah is not supposed to die and rise from the dead. This is a feature that dying and rising gods, or gods that go into the underworld, is found all over Greco-Roman literature, but it's not in TaNaCh at all, zero. But I think it's important for us to take this apart. So let's go to clip number 1.
Okay, before we do, you said something a second ago that the new viewer, the Christian tuning in, will be saying to themselves, wait a minute, you said that Luke copied from Paul, but Luke came first. That's what they're thinking right now. Right.
So let's say that Paul's letters are all dated to the 50s. Okay, it's possible that First Thessalonians was written in 49. Let's just say all of Paul's epistles are dated to the 50s. Now, that means those that are actually written by Paul. The book of Luke, however, is written very late. The book of Luke is probably conservatively written in 85, the mid-80s. So it's not only written after Paul, but it's written 35 years after Paul. There are some scholars, this is not the consensus, that think that Luke was actually written in the 2nd century, because Luke appears to be, according to some scholars, using language found in Josephus. But I'm going to ignore that. I'm steelmanning this. I don't want to, I don't want to go to the outlier. So Luke would have a lot of access to Paul's letters. And after all, remember, the author of the book of Luke also is the author of the book of Acts. And although the book of Acts is called the Acts of the Apostles, it really, 2/3 of the book of Acts is about Paul. So whoever wrote the book of Luke really was very committed to raising up Paul. In fact, the book of Acts never been written. It's unlikely that Paul would have gained any traction. So the connection is stark.
So Luke is not unlike Matthew, Mark, and John either. They're all after Paul, right?
Yeah, that means right. So the book of Mark was written at least the year 70. That's generally the consensus. I'm starting to believe it's a little bit later, but let's just say 70. And Matthew and Luke are written 10 and 15 years later, respectively, approximately. And John probably about 10 years after Matthew and Luke.
Perfect. Okay, let me get right over here to the clip.
Different people have some sort of a recollection or a writing or something that's attributed to them of being witness to his resurrection.
Well, you have Peter, Paul, Jude, James, and Matthew, Mark, and Luke. The thing with Matthew, Mark, and Luke is that Matthew and John are attributed to direct disciples of Jesus. Luke and Mark are not. So they are not eyewitnesses within the Jesus community. In fact, Luke prefaces his gospel by saying that. He's right up front about this. He's like, hey, I'm not an eyewitness. Don't confuse me with an eyewitness.
All right. So, Wes is adding a little color to what Luke says in the opening of the book, but we'll set that all aside. So what Wes is saying is that we have, as it turns out, people in the Christian Bible who claim to have been eyewitnesses. So, as an example, he named Jude. Well, there is a book of Jude in the Christian Bible. It's the second to the last book in the New Testament. Jude is the putative brother of James and Jesus. As it turns out, that's complete nonsense. Nowhere in the book of Jude does it mention that he saw Jesus rise from the dead, and the same thing goes for the book of James, who is supposedly, again, the consensus of scholarship is that James wasn't actually written by James, but we're going to ignore that. We're going to steelman this. He doesn't make that claim either. But this is where it gets really juicy. So most people think, I believe, that, well, the book of Matthew, of course, was written by Matthew? Well, it's not that Matthew is falsely ascribed to the disciple Matthew, the tax collector. It's just the book is written, it's anonymous, which means the author does not identify who he is. Now, it's not like the book of Matthew says, and yours truly, Matthew. Same thing goes for Luke. Luke doesn't end with going, with best wishes for a happy and healthy new year, Luke. It's not in there. Those ascriptions are very, very late. The person who assigns Matthew, the tax collector, to the first gospel, to Matthew, is Irenaeus, who in about, let's say, the year 180, Irenaeus, a very, very influential church father, Bishop of Lyon, modern-day France, originally from Turkey. And he's the one that says that Matthew wrote Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John. So as it turns out, nowhere in the book of Matthew does the writer say that I witnessed any of these things. And nowhere in the book of Matthew does the author say, I'm Matthew. So this is, and like people will just hear this and think, oh, I guess at least they claim this. It wouldn't make it true, right? I mean, if it is claimed in the Book of Mormon, that Joseph Smith encountered the angel Moroni with, 11 witnesses, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints claim that there are 11 witnesses to that. Even if they claim it, doesn't make it true. But here, the claim is completely fatuous. It's without merit, because as it turns out, not only doesn't the author of the book of Matthew, somebody wrote it, a highly literate Christian writer at the end of the first century, is writing it. He doesn't claim to be an eyewitness. He doesn't claim to be one of the people there. Doesn't make any of those claims. In fact, the only mention of Matthew in the book of Matthew is in Matthew chapter 9, verse 9, where the author speaks about Matthew, the tax collector, encountering Jesus in the third person, that Jesus came to him and said, come, let's go. And so he doesn't say he came to me. So now, I want to make this clear. If a Christian wants to say that the author of the book of Matthew was using some odd linguistic, and I believe on faith that Irenaeus was correct, and I trust the church that the author of Matthew was in fact the disciple Matthew, you're welcome to do that. That's your personal faith, but you can't say that this is proof, and that's what Wes is doing here. What he's saying is, I have evidence here, an eyewitness account. No, you don't. So the author is not, that means Wes is more Christian than the author of the book of Matthew. The author of the book of Matthew doesn't claim that he saw Jesus rose from the dead. In fact, as it turns out, it's a very strange text, and I'm not going to go into why it would be there, but in fact, the last chapter of the book of Matthew, which is the chapter which discusses the putative resurrection of Jesus, we're told that the disciples went to the Galilee, and that's where they saw Jesus. And it says there that some doubted it. So even in Matthew 28, even in the Christian Bible, even in the first gospel, the author admits that people were doubting it, even though he was standing right there, apparently. So you see that. The same thing goes for Mark. Mark is never claiming that Mark wrote it. On Luke, he's kind of overstating, but Luke does say that he gained this information. It came to us through eyewitnesses. Scholars disagree over whether Luke, if you read it, so what Luke writes in the first 5 verses of his book, and same thing in the beginning of Acts, really any Christian can say that we have it from eyewitnesses. So you can either read it that Luke interviewed eyewitnesses, or he has it from eyewitnesses, people who he, passed it all down. Regardless, Luke is not claiming to be an eyewitness. That's correct. And John, again, is written anonymously. Nowhere in the book of John does it say that John wrote it. In fact, John isn't mentioned in the book of John, ironically. So therefore, to say that there are all these eyewitnesses, and then Paul wasn't even there. I mean, Paul wasn't a Christian. He didn't believe in Jesus, we are told, at the time when Jesus was crucified. He converts to Christianity at a later date, which people disagree when, but he wasn't there. He is going to claim in 1 Corinthians 15 that that Jesus appeared to Peter, the 12, and more than or above 500. It's not clear what that means. It's very controversial because no one else makes that claim that Jesus appeared to more than 500 or above 500 people. And then to himself, least of all. So therefore, the claim he's making is really, he's now where he's getting that. Where is Wes pulling this out of, that Matthew this and that? It's really a church father, Papias, who's early 2nd century, who claims that Matthew and John were disciples. Mark was a secretary writing on behalf of Peter, and Luke was Christians came to believe that Luke was a companion of Paul. So we don't have any of those claims. We don't have those claims. Another thing you do have is Paul. Well, Paul wasn't there, so it's really all quite silly. Anyways, let's move on because this is very intriguing, this next piece.
Okay, got it. Let me put it back on screen.
Are we entirely certain of their measurement of days?
So this is an interesting question because of the differences between when the Gospel of John says Jesus died compared to the Synoptics, because John appears to be using the Roman convention of counting time, and the other Gospels, when they describe the timing, appear to be using the Jewish ones. And actually, if you correlate between the two, they match up pretty well. So the thing is, with Jews, any part of a day was considered a day. So 3 days and 3 nights becomes almost an idiom for any part of that day is the day. So if Jesus, and because they count evening and morning, evening to morning is the day, it's very possible that it wasn't like how we would think of 3 24-hour days, especially if he dies on Friday and wakes up on Sunday.
So I think you found Wes's response very confusing. If you didn't, then you weren't following him, because what he actually did was conflate two different topics. What Joe was asking about is just when was Jesus crucified. As it turns out, the Gospels do not agree on the day in which Jesus was crucified. This has nothing to do with the Roman or Jewish calendar. It's just simply that the Synoptic Gospels place Jesus' crucifixion on the first day of Passover, the 15th day of Nisan, period. Meaning, according to Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the Last Supper was in fact a Passover Seder. According to the author of the book of John, the Last Supper wasn't the Passover Seder. That's why there's no Eucharist in John chapter 13. If you want to find the Eucharist in the book of John, you will find it, but it's in chapter 6. And according to John, Jesus was crucified on the 14th day of Nisan, the day before Passover. Joe was asking a very important question, and I don't blame Wes for this, because he's on with Joe, and maybe he got nervous and he just sort of got this all confused. He's addressing a different question that wasn't being asked. So according to John, this is very important. Jesus is the Lamb of God. And that idea, although if you have even a perfunctory knowledge of Christianity, that idea that Jesus is the Lamb is really unique to the book of John. You won't find that in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Now, because the lambs were slaughtered, which were eaten on the first night of Passover, on the 14th day of Nisan, on the eve of the Passover, John has Jesus crucified a day earlier. Nothing Wes said will address this. Wes is addressing a different question, which I'll go to in a moment. So therefore, for example, at the Last Supper in the book of John, it's John 13, there's no Passover stuff going on, but Jesus is washing the feet of the disciples. That's the only gospel in which you'll find that event, because that replaces it. And when the disciples see Judas Iscariot leaving with a bag of money, and they're trying to figure out where is he going with the money, they presume that he's going to purchase the food necessary for the Seder the next day. See John chapter 13, verse 29. So as far as John is concerned, Jesus crucified a day earlier than Matthew, Mark, and Luke. That's the question Joe is asking. Wes, and it's, these things happen. Wes was addressing a different question. What Wes is addressing, and it doesn't work, but this is the best they can come up with, is we're told in Matthew chapter 12 that essentially Jesus will, being in the tomb for 3 days and 3 nights, we have Jonah, who's in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. So is Jesus going to be in the tomb for 3 days and 3 nights? Okay. Now there's a problem here. The problem here is, this may seem pedantic, but for the Christian Bible, this is very important. And that is that no matter what gospel you look at, Jesus was definitely not in the tomb for 3 days and 3 nights. At best, you could say, is he was in the tomb for 3 days and 2 nights. There's no third night. Okay. Now, according to John's account, this will be a little picayune, but it was already still dark when Mary Magdalene arrived. So you only have 2 days and 2 nights, but we'll set that aside. So, what's the deal? It's not 3 days and 3 nights. Now, how do Christians address this? Well, what they do is even though they reject the oral Torah or rabbinic Judaism, they can't stand the Talmud, but if they get into trouble, they'll run to rabbinic literature to find a way to rescue themselves. And as it turns out, in areas of Jewish law, Miktsas Yom Kekula Yom, which means a part of a day is like a whole day. Let me give you an example, okay? So my father was Nifter. My father passed away not quite 2 months ago, okay? So we buried him on Sunday, and I and my 3 sisters, we sit Shiva, which means for 7 days of mourning, where we're sitting and people are visiting us. And there are very special laws associated with that immediate period of mourning. So my father was buried, by the time he was buried, it was like 1, 2 in the afternoon, or let's say something like that, okay? It was very interesting that when I was burying my father, I knew that would be the last time I'd ever see his grave, because I'm a priest, I'm a Kohen, and my obligation to bury him overrides the prohibition of me being in a cemetery. So I buried him, but, I knew that I would never, ever come back to the grave, and the next time I'll see my dad is in the resurrection. It's a very striking thing. But the key, what is germane to this, is that it was by the time my family came home to begin the 7-day process of mourning. So because we got home, it was still daytime, it was daylight. I don't know what time it was. Let's say it was 3 in the afternoon. I don't remember exactly when. So because we began to sit the Shiva, the 7 days of mourning, while it was still daylight, so even that small part of the day, that Sunday afternoon we were sitting Shiva, that counts as an entire day. Okay, that's a classic example that any part of the day is like the entire day. Now, that is true when it comes to the laws concerning a day, but not when it says 3 days and 3 nights. That doesn't work. But just so you are alert to this point, this is not a Roman thing or a Jewish thing. Christians, not routinely, but always use rabbinic law to answer this, to address this question. It's not 3 days and 3 nights. No matter which gospel you use, it's not 3 days and 3 nights. All Christian apologists use Jewish law, which is not in the text. in order to address this. Even though they despise rabbinic Judaism and claim it's completely made up, they appeal to it whenever it is convenient to them. I don't know Wes, so I just want to say that I'm sure he's a nice person. I don't know him. It's not like he's like, this Machiavellian person who's coming up with this. He's reading this in other apologetic books, and everyone uses this, and he's repeating it on the show with Joe. So just address that. Let's move on.
Okay, so a question that he did say in there, he really seemed to blur the lines on what is actually a 24-hour period. Could you clarify that?
What he was doing was he was answering a different question. Joe was just asking when do they agree when Jesus was crucified. So all of them claim he was crucified on Friday, but according to Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it was the first day of Passover. According to John, it was the eve of Passover. That's a monumental problem for which there is no answer. I mean, they can argue all they want. There's no answer. That's what Joe is asking. He's answering a different question, which wasn't part of the question. And that was, why is Jesus supposedly entombed for 3 days and 3 nights? But according to none of the Gospels was Jesus in the tomb for 3 nights. So he's using a rabbinic idea that it's completely convoluted. It has nothing to do with the question, but that's it. He just mixed that up. People get nervous when they're being interviewed, and that happens.
Right. So, but to be fair, so sunset all the way back around to sunset, that's a 24-hour period. He said from sunset to sunrise is 1 day, and it's like, what?
Yeah, let's not use the term sunset because that gets confusing. Okay. I don't want to deal with twilight. From the nightfall, because sunset, let's say there's a 45-minute of twilight from sunset to night. I'm going to confuse everyone. So that's a questionable day. From nightfall, when you could see 3 stars, okay,
got it,
until the next night, that's 1 day. Because the world was created, it was evening, it was morning, it was 1 day. So the day begins at nightfall.
Okay.
Never use sunset in there because that will confuse you. People wouldn't get married during that period. But go ahead.
Good. Okay, cool. Thank you for clarifying that. Let me pull this back up. All right, take 3.
Kind of crazy that it wound up taking over the area.
Well, that's part of, I think, the argument of, well, how do you explain that? How do you explain it going from 11 scared disciples in an upper room to being willing to go out and die for the proclamation that you believe that Jesus rose from the dead, and you saw him and you touched him and you ate with him, and he wasn't a ghost. You actually ate fish with the resurrected Jesus.
Yeah, so this is huge, and this comes up very frequently where people ask the question, well, why were the disciples who supposedly witnessed Jesus' resurrection and encountered him, as he says, when he describes Jesus eating fish with them, so that's unique to Luke's gospel. The question is, why would, as Luke 24, but why would they willingly die? Because if they knew they were lying, if they knew they never saw Jesus, why were they willing to die for their beliefs? If I tell you this comes up so frequently, and it just blows my mind away. And in fact, I would say it was about 8 years ago, you and I were doing a show, and a call came in with a Christian who was just beside himself. And he asked that exact question. Why would Peter, as an example, when he was sentenced to be executed by crucifixion, Peter said that he wanted to be crucified upside down because he didn't feel worthy to die like his Lord. And incidentally, that comes up in the 3-hour interview. So and I asked the fellow, where does it say that? Where does it say that Peter died willingly for what he believed? Because the argument is that the disciples were offered to renounce their beliefs, and live or die. And that they almost, or with the exception of John, they all die as martyrs. Okay. So, and that's an intriguing question. So I asked the fellow, where does it say it anywhere in the Christian Bible that Peter died, that Paul died, that any of them had that offer and turned down and died? And the answer is, it doesn't exist. You probably don't remember this, but I actually asked the fellow this on air, and there was just dead silence. And it was this awkward 5 or 6 seconds where the guy was very nervous, thumbing through his Christian Bible. And then I said to him, you don't need to look. It isn't there. There's nowhere in the Christian Bible that Paul's was executed. These are later Christian traditions that were invented. In fact, the book of Acts ends. Remember, the book of Acts was written, let's say, about the year 85. The book of Acts ends with Paul being released from prison, free man. I mean, do you think, like, if Paul was executed in Rome, beheaded, like Acts, the author of Acts, who really liked Paul, would go, no, I don't think Paul's willingness to die for his faith was important. No, is it not in there? So all that stuff that disciples are willing to die for their faith, for what they believe, is complete nonsense. These are later Catholic inventions. They are not in the Christian Bible. There is James, not the brother of Jesus, but the brother of John, the son of Zebedee, who in the book of Acts is killed by Herod, but it doesn't say there that he was offered to if he would renounce it. There's nothing in the text that even suggests that he had a chance to renounce his faith and then not get executed. And in fact, it's interesting, I have to say this. In one video, I had a comment where a guy said, but doesn't Peter say that, when he's told by Jesus that he's going to, suffer many things and you're going to deny me. And Peter says that, Lord, that will not happen in Matthew 26, I think it's 35. I'll die with you. I'll give my life. And Jesus says, no, you're going to deny me. And in fact, according to the Gospels, Peter denied Jesus 3 times. Now they disagree on how many times the cock, it doesn't matter, but it was 3 times. So it's just quite the contrary. So nowhere in the Christian Bible does it say that Peter willingly died for his beliefs. It doesn't say it anywhere. This is an invention later, and people just use this. John, according to Christian tradition, lived a very, very long time, because Christians always recognize that the book of John was the last of the 4 Gospels, probably written at the very end of the 1st century. Because how could someone live that long, especially in the ancient world? So according to them, just John lived to be like whatever, nearly 100 years old, to have been able to write the book of John and the epistles of John and the book of Revelation, whatever. So it's all nonsense, basically. But I want to go back to what we opened with. I'm pointing these things out. But what's very important is that Mashiach's not supposed to do any of these things. The Mashiach is going to rebuke the nations. He is going to teach the nations, and they're going to listen to him. And nation will not lift up sword against nation, neither will they learn of war anymore. Rather, they will stream up to Jerusalem. And for Zion will go forth the law and the word of God from Yerushalayim. That's what's supposed to happen. Not the Messiah is supposed to die and rise on the 3rd day. So there's this whole, people are arguing over this issue, and it's like, but the whole thing is fiction. That means that this is not what the Mashiach is supposed to do. And I plead with people to please go back to the original sources, to the original text, and then you won't need me. Just read the primary sources, and all this becomes very clear. Mashiach must do the following: rebuke the nations of the world repent, peace comes, what's happening in Gaza, Lebanon, Ukraine, Yemen will come to an end completely. There'll be a universal knowledge of God, the ingathering, the exiles, the building of the third temple in Jerusalem, and the resurrection of the dead. That's what occurs in the Messianic age, where the Davidic dynasty is restored as promised to King David in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 12 through 16. And please, may we see the coming of the true Mashiach, who will not die and rise on the third day, quickly in our time.
Amen. Very cool. All right. We've got that next caller's in line. Okay, Alana, you are live on the air. Go ahead with your question. If you enjoy this channel and the content, and it has changed your life, or perhaps the life of a loved one or a close friend, would you please consider supporting this work? You can click this link and it'll take you directly to my website with the donate button. Or there's a Patreon link and a mailing address for snail mail if you would prefer. If you do donate, please do me a favor and leave me a phone number where I can contact you and thank you properly. I hope you all have a wonderful 2025. Shalom.
Okay, hi, Rabbi. I am calling from Michigan, and I just had a question. So, if in fact Yeshua is, a Jewish man, hearing about Mashiach for his entire, upbringing. Of course, he's circumcised. Of course, his mother gives the proper tribute for a firstborn son. All that. It's possible that he could grow up and think or develop an idea that he's Messiah. So, but my question is, aside from that, how do you explain the accounts of the miracles and the miraculous things that he did, witnessed and purported by people in the area at that time?
Well, just stay on. Don't lose me. How do you explain the miracles that Joseph Smith did? There were witnesses where Joseph Smith received gold plates from the angel Moroni, and that only happened in the 19th century. Just stay with me, because I want to how do you explain that? Like, why aren't you a Mormon? Is that a fair question?
Well, I mean, partially, but if in fact, if there wasn't just one or two, I mean, we're talking about big things like a resurrection from the dead.
Satya Sai Baba, who did not die that long ago in India, resurrected the dead, healed the blind, performed miracles in front of thousands of people. He has 30 million followers right now who are alive, who will swear to this. Why don't you believe that? I mean, the Catholics believe that there were miracles done in Portugal, where many, many people at the beginning of the 20th century saw the Virgin Mary. I think all these religions are claiming miracles. And the question is, why do you only accept the miracles done in the religion that you already believe in? And please don't be offended. And
no,
just completely are unmoved by the miracles claimed in another religion. I mean, in Islam, Muhammad was an illiterate prophet and wrote the Quran. I mean, if you're illiterate, how could he have done that? But apparently you're not persuaded by that to become a Muslim. So what's really happening is that people say, okay, this is the religion I believe in. I love Jesus, so I'm going to believe that. And I don't believe in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, so I'm going to ignore all those claimed miracles. And as it turns out, all religions claim that their founders were able to perform miracles. The only question, so then how do you know what the truth is? Because after all, and thank you so much for your question, dear. Thank you. The question is then, after all, then how do we believe in anything? I mean, doesn't the Torah claim miracles as well? Like, how do you pick and choose? So there's something really very valuable here, and that is that the Torah is the original text. The Torah is the text that the vast majority of the world believes in as a holy book. And it's not that the Jewish people or are the most popular group on the planet. We're not liked in many corners, in many regions of the world. We're not. Despite that, the vast majority of the world believe that the Torah, the prophets, the writing, the Hebrew scriptures is the word of God. And however, other religions are adding accretions. Christianity, that the Messiah had to die and rise. So what we do is we have to compare not miracle claims. I mean, the Roman Catholic Church claims miracles for people who it canonizes as a saint. The Orthodox Church claims miracles that are done using its relics and icons. All these religions claim miracles. What we're doing is we're asking what is compatible with the Hebrew Bible, and if it is, then we accept it, and if it's in opposition to the Jewish scriptures, we reject it, right? I mean, in the ancient world, especially, there were a lot of things people didn't understand. In the ancient world, people repeated things over they heard from others, and the stories became more and more embellished. I mean, just even look at the book of Mark as compared to the book of John. Look how different they are. I mean, Mark doesn't know anything about a virgin birth, right? Matthew, Luke apparently do. Why? Because the story grew. And then, the book of John, Jesus walking around, essentially inferring that he's God. Well, he didn't do that in the Synoptic Gospels. So you see the story just growing. And as people repeat the story, I don't know, as a kid, when I'd go to birthday parties, when I was a little kid, there was this game we would play that I thought was hysterical. And I think it was called Telephone, where we'd sit in a circle, maybe 10 kids would sit in a circle, and I would repeat over something to one person, and he'd repeat a whisper in the air. And it was very funny how, when it came to the other end, how different it was than what I had said. So in the ancient world, just people thought miracles were happening all the time, partially because people didn't understand. They didn't know what an earthquake was. They didn't know what a tectonic plate was, or that it could shift because of an earthquake that occurs under the oceans. They didn't know any of this. To them, lightning was the gods who were angry. They just didn't know. So in the ancient world, there was so many things that were inexplicable that they saw demons and ghosts and people who were mentally ill. They just thought, were possessed by a demon, like Mary Magdalene in the book of Luke. So I would just say that it's not an accident that the Virgin Mary appears a lot to women over pancakes for breakfast every Sunday morning in Brazil and the Philippines. Why? Because those are Roman Catholic countries, right? Brazil is the largest Catholic country in the world. Now, why doesn't the Virgin Mary come to Saudi Arabia, Kuwait? Like, there's apparently she can't get a visa to get into Kuwait. Like, why does the Virgin Mary only appear to people who are already predisposed to believing in her? Well, we know the answer. The answer is they want to believe it. And I'll never forget this. When I was in Indonesia, it's all hit me like a bomb. It was 2016. I think it was March 2016. The biggest pastor in Indonesia. So Indonesia is home to like 35 million Christians, something like that. And this is a guy who filled stadiums. He was known as Peter the Great, but that wasn't his real name. He was a big, big, big guy. And he was in his late 40s, and he suddenly dropped dead. But he was a prosperity preacher, the whole deal. He was big. And he had promised his followers that he would take them to Jerusalem. And he died in his late 40s. I don't know what it was. But the point was, within a few days, of course, everyone was perplexed because he said he's going to lead everybody to Israel, to Jerusalem. And suddenly, these women, now, please, don't be angry at me, but it was all women who suddenly were claiming that this Peter the Great appeared to them in a vision. Well, there you go. That's the deal. And people want to believe the story becomes more and more embellished. What people do is they, I think, love Jesus, and therefore they like the stories about Jesus and therefore believe in it. I would posit to you that, in fact, to search TaNaCh, to use the Hebrew Bible as your only guide. Why? Because Christians believe in the Hebrew Bible. I'm not suggesting, say, read the Talmud, or I'm just saying Christians who clearly, the people I've encountered for the most part, are genuine, sincere people. Like you believe that the Hebrew Bible is the Word of God, read it, and then ask yourself, does anything in the Jewish scriptures is a comport with does it comport what you find in the New Testament? The answer is no. Nothing doesn't resemble it. In fact, the Messiah is not a miracle worker in TaNaCh. You can look at TaNaCh, you'll never see the Messiah running around doing miracles. So what he's doing is a teacher, he's a judge. See Isaiah 2. I mean, all you have to do is read the first 5 verses of Isaiah 2. All Christians agree that's about the Messiah. Read the first 6 verses of Isaiah 11. You can read the whole Isaiah 11. It's an easy chapter to read. There's nothing in there about the Messiah doing miracles. Nothing. That's very much, but these ideas that these messiahs can run around doing miracles, so that was very much an idea that's at home, not only in Israel, in the Levant, but well beyond. In Egypt, all the gods, Osiris, all these guys are all doing these insane miracles, and so were emperors of Rome purported to do that. So thank you very much for your thoughtful question. William, with your permission, I just wanted to mention something, if I may. So right now, as we're speaking, there's a tumultuous moment going on in Israel where hostages are being released, and we pray they're okay, and terrorists in exchange are being released as well. And it's very controversial here in Israel. I mean, people, of course, are relieved that hostages are being released, but they're concerned about, it's not people who are in prison for blue-collar crimes, but some of them are killers. And I just wanted to say this to the Fold family in particular. In 2018, September 16th, Ari Fold was murdered by a terrorist in the Gush at Zion Juncture. I knew him. He was a very special man. And he was stabbed, and he was able to shoot the terrorist. The terrorist survived. Ari died. And the terrorist who stabbed Ari survived and is part of that exchange, part of that is among the people who are being released now. And this is a very traumatic time for the Fold family. Hillel, his brother, I just saw last week. My heart goes out to you, to the families who are seeing the people you love who are now released by Hamas. My heart is with you. It must be a time of great relief to have your family members back. But there's a lot of mixed feelings in Israel about this whole deal. A lot of people have, there's a lot of pain, and there's, of course, relief. Thank God that these hostages are released. Not all the hostages are released. Many of them are still in a very dark place, 62 miles southwest of where I am right now. But for the Fold family, this is a family whose sons of Holocaust survivors. It's very difficult for them. I knew Ari, and my thoughts are with your family right now, because I know it's an agonizing time for those who are the victims of terror to see that the perpetrators are being released. So my thoughts are with the Fold family.
All right, we'll move right into our next caller. We have Ethik is on. I hope I pronounced your name right. Please forgive me if I did not. Go ahead and tell Rabbi your question.
Rabbi Tovia Singer, thank you so much. Baruch Hashem. I've been a little bit very, very harsh with you 10 years ago, but now I've come to know the truth. I just want you to clarify to me the blood atonement and the pure language. That's like the Lashon Kodash, that when the Mashiach comes, that we will be able to speak the language.
Okay.
Okay.
You can go ahead and hang up now and tune in for your answer. Thank you for your call.
He's a sweetie
Yeah,
pie.
he was a nice guy.
Isn't
We
he a
talked-
sweetie pie? You know, there's so many people who used to hate me. And I get this very interesting email every day from different people so I said, I used to hate your guts. And one guy wrote to me and said, I thought you were the Antichrist. He wrote me an email today. And I just want you to know I love you and I used to hate you. And I researched it finally. And, you know, God does that with people where he takes a heart of stone and turns it into a heart of flesh. So that's really very beautiful. Thank you. So, a lot of people who would assassinate me who now think I'm okay. So
that's true.
That's really, my mom is very happy with each one of those calls. But thank you, you're a sweetheart. So you're talking about, so first, the blood atonement. So let's just appoint two things you said, blood atonement, pure speech. Let's look at both of them. So as it turns out, most Christians who come from the Christian world think that in biblical times, if somebody sinned, no matter what it was, you brought a sacrifice as an atonement for your sin. That's completely not correct. The vast majority of sins could not be remedied by a sacrifice. However, there were some, like unintentional sins, or that's called the Charbon Chatos, Leviticus chapter 4. A person who sinned intentionally but confessed it, didn't get caught, but say, hey, I stole it. So that person can bring a guilt offering. You have a unique situation where somebody brought an offering in a state of impurity in the temple, knowingly or unknowingly. So you would have to, on Yom Kippur, a offering in a state of purity is you brought to atone for bring a sacrifice instead of impurity. Okay, so that's a simple remedy. But the vast majority of sins, you can't bring an offering for it. If you steal and you get caught, you just pay double. If you steal livestock, you have to pay 4 or 5 times what was stolen. If you commit murder, of course, you need to have enough evidence, so that's a capital crime. You can't bring sacrifice for that. Okay. So now, in the Messianic age, a key feature of the Messianic age is that the whole world will know the truth and rebellion will come to an end. Okay. We're not going to become robots or programmed or like switching from PC to Mac and like it's a whole new operating system. It's just the truth will be nigla. The truth will be amplek, that's Yiddish, which means it'll be open for all to see. The knowledge of God will cover the world as the water covers the sea. Habakkuk 2:14, Isaiah 11:9. Everyone will know the truth. No one will have to teach his neighbor about God, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them. Therefore, sins of rebellion will come to an end. Why? It's not that we're programmed. It's that it will be so obvious, the truth will be so obvious that no one would want to sin. In the same way, if you cook, I'm sure, you're in the kitchen, you're fixing some food. I'm sure in your life you have burnt yourself, you've cut yourself, right? And when you do that, when you injure yourself in the kitchen, why? You weren't being careful. You were being a dummy, right? I mean, if you're not paying attention, or you just before thinking, you just grab a pot without thinking, wait, that pot is hot, and then you burn yourself, right? And you go, boy, that was stupid. Or you cut yourself because you just, all right. So that's being careless. That sin can be remedied through a sin offering, a carbon chatas. And as we see in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 45, verse 20 and 22, the Messiah himself, who is called the Prince, and Nasi, will bring a sin offering for unintentional sins. It says it explicitly. Now, for Christianity, that is a existential problem, because according to them, the Messiah doesn't sin. Why would he bring a sin offering? And he is the final sin offering. He's the lamb. It's just absolutely an impossibility. They just don't know what to do with it. Literally says that he is going to bring a sin offering on behalf of himself and the nation for his own sins and the sins of the nation. According to the Christian Bible, the sacrificial system will, according to the Christian Bible, come to an end. See Hebrews 10:18. See Romans chapter 6. So why is the sacrificial system resuming in the temple? In fact, there are many priests, something I may have never shared with you, but many Kaihanim, people who are my family, who are descendants of Aaron, study the laws of bringing offerings in preparation for the coming of the Messiah. So there are many yeshivot here in Israel, programs for priests, descendants of Aaron like myself, who are studying these laws, so that when the Messiah comes, please God, it'll be very soon, will be ready to step forward and to bring offerings. Let's set that aside. Prophet named Zephaniah, he's known probably to you as Zephaniah. Zephaniah lived here in Yerushalayim, right where I am now. He preached right here. And he was a contemporary of Jeremiah. They lived the exact same time. And in chapter 3, verse 9, he says that all the nations will speak b'safa berura, in a pure speech, which means that the whole world will acknowledge HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and all the words that will come out of the mouths, the lips of the nations of the world will be only focused towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because as Zechariah says, that God will be king of the whole world. And in that day, he will be one, and his name will be one. What does it mean? God will then, in Zechariah 14, verse 16, he will then be king of the whole world. He's not king now, but the problem is that most of the world doesn't accept him properly. Right? But when Mashiach comes, everyone will know the truth, and they will speak b'safa brura, a pure speech. By the way, that's the word bar. You remember the kiss the sun thing? All right. Anyway, those who speak Hebrew know that. B'safa brura, that means to speak with purity out of the lips, not as they do now, with what is dark is light, what is light is dark, what is sweet is bitter, what is bitter is sweet. The whole world today, we're living in olam hasheker. Everything is all lies. What's valuable is considered worthless, the mitzvot, and what's worthless is considered valuable. That's the world we live in now. When Mashiach comes, what is really precious will be deemed as such, and all the nations, their lips will be pure. May we be zecha. May we merit to see the coming of the true Mashiach quick in our time, where this prophecy will be fulfilled. Thank you for your thoughtful question, and welcome home.
All right. Sit tight. I'm queuing the next caller. 1 second. Kent, you are live on the air. Go ahead with your question, sir.
Hey, first like to say I really appreciate Tovia and the kind, gentle approach he has to, and listen, I can say this because he approached me when I was in some kind of dumb ideas. So I appreciate your patience and kindness addressing some really dumb things and trying to sort it out for people. I grew up in a very fundamental Pentecostal background, and I was always taught, Jesus and the millennial reign, and that he was the ultimate sacrifice and there would be no more sacrifices. And, I was taught that so much, I finally started reading a little for myself. And in particular, in the late 90s, there was a lot of talk of Ezekiel 38 and 39 because it looked like, Russia was going to attack Israel and we were getting ready for the millennial age to start. And then I just read a little bit further past 38 and 39, where it clearly states there's sacrifices in the temple once again. And even the prince of the temple does sacrifices for himself. And I asked my grandfather, who was a Pentecostal preacher, I said, what does that mean? And I would either get blank stares from him or just, it's symbolic and it doesn't mean what it sounds like. Well, what does it mean? But now, I've drawn all these things into question, but I find things like this from the Jewish perspective, and I don't know which way to go. Like here in Micah, in the fourth, I think it's Micah 4th chapter. It says, They shall sit every man under his vine and under his fig tree, and none shall make them afraid, for the mouth of the Lord, capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, of hosts hath spoken it. And it goes on to say, for all people will walk every one in the name of his God. And that's a little g. And then it says, we will walk in the name of the Lord of our God forever and ever. Right. And, it's like, are people actually going to worship something else?
No. Well, thank you for your question. Can I ask you a question while you have you on?
Right.
When you were a fundamentalist Pentecostal in the old days, but you have to give it to me straight, what did you think of the Jews?
I was always taught that the Jews are the chosen people of God, and that we are the wild branches of a wild olive grafted into the true olive, which was, the nation, the true bloodline, the lineage. It was never a replacement theology for me.
All right, so you taught Romans on that. All right, great. Thank you, sweetheart.
Go ahead and hang up now and tune in for the answer. Thank you.
Yeah. So, it's such a blessing to hear these sweet voices, sweet minds. So nice, so delightful. So much better than reading the news. Anyway, thank you. So Micha, chapter 4, the prophet is doing something really quite unusual in that he is quoting Isaiah, which doesn't happen often. But Micha adds a little of his own prophecy. So Micha in chapter 4 is quoting Isaiah chapter 2. It's an end time prophecy where there'll be complete peace. No one will shudder. No one will be afraid. And there's a prophecy I really encourage you to read. It's really beautiful. It's the same. It's different, very different wording, but do look at Zephaniah chapter 3. I mean, if you'd open it now, you'd really be very moved by it, especially given the trauma in the world today, that the remnant of Israel will dwell safely and no one will ever, they will never be made afraid again because they will finally dwell securely and their enemies will not be able to harm them, and they will commit no iniquities, neither will be any lies found in their mouths. Remember Isaiah 53? Look, if you want, you want the truth, right? No one wants to go back to the original, all right? So Zephaniah chapter 3, verse 12 through 16. Just try it once. It really is going to feel great. And it's the real thing. It's not like, you have a glass of vodka or inject something or smoke something where the next day you feel terrible. This is like the word of Hashem, which means it's everlasting. It lifts you up and keeps you up. So at the end of days, everything that we're seeing now, I mean, where I am, Jerusalem is very peaceful, really is a very peaceful place. But of course, all around me, there's a lot of turmoil, a lot of tribulation going on right now. North, Lebanon, Syria, to the east, Iran, and to the southwest, Gaza. It's a lot of turmoil. And it's not like, we Jews think that we're the center of everything. I don't need to do this, but if I went on to in the major media right now, they're talking about what's going on in Israel and God. I mean, that's what's going on. They're not talking, there are crazy wars going on in Africa, but I assure you it's not in the headlines. So that's just the way it is. There's a promise, and the promise is that there'll be a time of peace where people will sit and no one will make them afraid. And please God, my dear brother, we will see that quickly in our time. And to you, welcome home. Shalom.
All right, give me 1 second. The more phone calls we have, the longer it takes me to queue them. That's good. Sit tight. This will all be edited out. Used to, this was not even an option. We couldn't even do this. They just had to take everything blind. I'm so glad that they updated everything. Okay, Gavriel, you are live on the air. Go right ahead with your question.
Okay, beautiful. Rabbi Tovia Singer, what a blessing. I have tears in my eyes because I remember in 2008, I went to Israel. I went there specifically to find you and debate you. I was a Messianic at the time and a Christian. In 2012, I started my process to return to Judaism. And so I have tears in my eyes because I discovered through my DNA that my grandfather's a Cohen. Our family is from Spain and from Germany, and my family moved to Mexico in the 1500s. My question is this: how is it that the writers of the only thing I can think of, it had to be someone who was very knowledgeable about about Jewish hermeneutics, because you find that they are grabbing ideas from the Torah, TaNaCh, like 3 days and 3 nights. So you say that it doesn't exist because in Luke chapter 24, I believe it's verse 45, I believe 24,
46.
45, 44, 46.
46.
Yes. It says that it spoke of my death in the Torah, the writings, and the prophets. The Psalms and the prophets. So here we see in the Torah this allusion of 3. I didn't go to...
All right, let me help you out. First of all, thank you, Gabriel, for calling in.
Go ahead and hang up now, Gabriel. Tune in for your answer. Thank you.
So there's nothing in 1 Samuel chapter 20, which talks about 3 days and 3 nights. You do have that with Jonah and the whale. I want to instruct you, the viewer, when speaking to a Christian and discussing the veracity of the claim that Jesus rose on the third day, do not start up with 3 days and 3 nights. Because the Christian will go, you're being pedantic, you're being ridiculously picayune, can't you see the big picture? So please don't. I just addressed that because Wes addressed that in his conversation with Joe Rogan. So don't do that because Christians won't get it. They'll be going, oh, you sound like a Pharisee. You're not seeing the big picture, like the Pharisees would. So it's going to throw them off. So it's a very, very, very bad idea to make a deal about that. Really don't. But as it turns out, you could have 3 days and 3 nights, but if the text would say 3 days and 3 nights, it really means 3 days and 3 nights, and part of a day doesn't count. That's all. It's a very small deal. So, of course, you have 3 days. I can think of many examples of that. It's just their answer doesn't help them, but I think this is this is really a minor issue, and I can say this, that when you speak to a Christian, of course, you want the Christian to consider what you're saying. And if you make a deal out of that, the Christian is going to go, you really do not know the Lord. A Christian is just going to find that so offensive. They're going to go, what are you talking about? Now, it is more meaningful to ask the question, why does the book of John assign Jesus' crucifixion date to a day before Passover rather than synoptics? That becomes more meaningful, but it really isn't the whole. The real issue is Messiah is not supposed to rise on the third day from a tomb. That's really what matters. That whole thing that's what Christians want to find out about, not this little detail. Anyways, thank you, Gabriel, for your question.
All right, let's see what we got here. All right, David, you're live on the air. Go right ahead with your question, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you again, Rabbi and William, for this great service that you give, and a good Vach. So when I looked at your title on the video today, it says that Rabbi Singer responds to the guest on Joe Rogan. I thought you were going to bring up the interview he did with Mel Gibson, who brought up the Shroud of Turin and this supposed recent study that they did with dating that trying to confirm that it's a real item, a real artifact. So I think we can maybe prove that it's a fake with logic in using Jewish law, or at least make a strong argument for that. And so how is that? So If you look at the Shroud of Turin, you'll see he's got long, flowing, gorgeous hair. I know, Rabbi, you mentioned many times he could be on the cover of GQ. You know, such a lovely mane of hair. But I think by all accounts, Jesus was supposedly a religious Jew, a Pharisee, or a rabbi of his time. He almost certainly would have had short hair. The reason for that is that religious Jews wear tefillin. As we know, there's a very important law regarding tefillin phylacteries that they wear on the arm and head, the black boxes and straps, of chatzitza, of a barrier that would be that cannot be allowed between the head and the tefillin itself. And the many authorities, including the Maxis Shekels, what his name is, born in 1720, consider long flowing hair as a chatzitza, as a barrier.
Sweetheart, let me just say this to you. Let's tie this up. The Shroud of Turin is and thank you for your question. The Shroud of Turin is a 14th century fraud. The Vatican admitted it. It was tested, not one laboratory, but multiple laboratories. And it's a fraud, and people won't let go of it because to them it's a relic, and and people have miracles done in the name of that relic, and it's just a silly fraud. It's a medieval invention, creation, and people then started claiming all sorts of miracles. And the shroud was unknown prior to that. There was no shroud running around the year 1000. The church fathers didn't talk about any shroud. It was just somebody made it. And that's it. That's all there is to it. If you're speaking to a Christian, I wouldn't talk about the shroud at all, because really what matters is what does it say in TaNaCh about the Messiah? What does TaNaCh say? What does the Bible say? That the shroud was created is because they wanted another relic. Why was Mark chapter 16, verse 9 through 20 interpolated? The last 12 passages of the book of Mark are a later interpolation. Why? Because they wanted the book of Mark to comport with Matthew, Luke, and John and have resurrection appearances. It was invented later, and then they stuck it in. The whole thing is Christians will be offended, but the whole thing is a scam. They had no trouble making claims that were completely fatuous. It just doesn't matter. Christians celebrate Christmas. They all know that Christmas is a pagan holiday, which the church adopted. They know that the church didn't start celebrating Christmas on December 25th until the 4th century, at the end of Constantine's life. They know this and keep doing it. Now, I tip my hat to many Christians who won't celebrate Christmas because they know it's pagan, including the Puritans, who were English-speaking Calvinists. There are some. So they just do this stuff, and it's not consistent with TaNaCh. That's it. And the shroud is a medieval fraud. That's the end of it. Forget about long hair, short hair. It's true. All the gods in the ancient world look great, except for Buddha, who was overweight. That was it. Buddha was a short, fat, bald guy. But besides that, they all look terrific. All right. Anyways, thank you.
So, a logic that I've been dealing with the first time I heard about that, this is while I was a Christian. I was thinking, unless there were scientists back in the day who collected blood samples of everybody, and then later they found the body to compare to see if that everything matched up perfectly. The only thing the shroud could prove is that someone died who was executed. If it was real, it couldn't prove a particular person died. It could only prove that someone did. And how many people were executed by crucifixion back then? Thousands. It could have just been any random guy, and that's just my logic. Is it possible that they could match the blood? Let's say, for example, it was real. Did they have the technology to say, no, it was definitely Jesus because we drew blood samples from the actual shroud and we matched it up with his mother's DNA? Was that even a possibility?
No, they didn't know what DNA was at the time. That's a fairly recent discovery. No, they wouldn't have known blood types. They didn't even know there was such a thing as blood types. They didn't even know that blood carried oxygen through the body. That was discovered by a Unitarian Christian in the 16th century. And the guy who discovered pulmonary circulation, just that the lungs put oxygen in the blood, which then circulates, was burnt alive by Calvin in the 16th century. His name is Michael Severtus, a famous physician. And he was burnt alive because he just didn't believe in the Trinity. What are we talking about here? Let's move on.
Okay. I'm just going to get that out there.
No, they didn't know any of this stuff. The thing is painted on.
All right, good deal. All right, this could possibly be our last caller. Mark, you're live on the air. Go ahead with your question, sir.
Hi, it's Madman Mark from Binghamton, New York. The question I have is, if God saw the evil in the world and was going to wipe it out with a flood, and he saw righteousness in Noah, wouldn't Noah be considered the savior of the world instead of Jesus? I mean, if God didn't see righteousness in Noah, the human race would be obliterated. We wouldn't even be having this conversation right now. There would be no human race to begin with.
Right. So the Christian would rightfully say to you that Noah was, saved the world physically. Every human being is a descendant of 8 people. It's for that reason that the story of a flood is in virtually every culture out there. But God chose Noah and to deliver Noah, and thus humanity would be saved. The question I think that's more pressing for the Christian is, how was Noah righteous? I mean, in Christian theology, when we are told in Genesis chapter 6 that Noah was a righteous man in his generation, in Christian theology, that's not possible. No one could be righteous. Of course, that's very consistent with most of our low self-esteem, where we sometimes think of ourselves as unworthy. But in far as TaNaCh is concerned, we are creating the image of God, and Noah was a successful person. It doesn't mean he was perfect. He made mistakes in his life. David made mistakes. There are great people who make mistakes. No one's perfect. You're born of a virgin, and you're the son of God. Then what's the big deal? So Noah had free will, and so I don't think Christians would find that very persuasive. But although that typology is found in Christian literature, nevertheless, thank you so much for your thoughtful question.
Okay. Well, do you have time for one more, or does that wrap us up?
We could slide in one more.
Okay, give me 1 second to pull this up. Okay, right on from New York. Go right ahead with your question. You're live on the air.
When we think of Jesus saying eye for eye, tooth for tooth, we've got Martin Luther King Day tomorrow, and he quoted that and said that's just going to leave everybody blind and toothless. But my concern is, why doesn't anybody repeat the beginning of that commandment written by Moses that says life for life, where God is setting up our standard for justice, where if someone takes a life, their life is forfeit. And we're not upholding that. We'd rather turn the other cheek. And I'd really like to know just what you think about that. I think most Jews really think those terrorists need to die.
I'm not sure I grasp your question. Let me just say this, okay? The reason why, from what I could see, people are very traumatized by what's going on is that the very people who planned October 7th were people who were released in a lopsided hostage exchange with Gilad Shalit. Okay, so there's this very burning memory and it's here we go again. You follow? So people are, very relieved that live hostages are being released. Very relieved. And please God, something really wonderful will happen. There'll be peace and all this hell will come to an end. I could just say it very clearly. This is not controversial. The reason why people are very, very worried is that the individuals that planned out, the architects of October 7th, many of them were released in a previous lopsided exchange. In fact, I believe of the more than 1,000 terrorists that released in exchange for Gilad Shalit, I believe the number is 82% of them returned back to terror. So, but the Jewish people have a tremendous sense of solidarity. I was thinking about that a lot today because this was on my mind, and we are all very relieved that they're home. It's just, but we're terrified of what will happen to the next victims of the terrorists who are being released. Everybody is going through this in one way or another. Everyone is very relieved, but everyone is feeling tremendous turmoil because we've been there again, but everyone wants the hostages to be home. But it's happy and sad and it's concerned. It's everything. Everyone I know is very concerned, very relieved, but very concerned, just the way it is. Why? It's not because we're paranoid about anything. It's because we've been down this road before. And, imagine if in the United States, people, took terrorists, took hostages and so on and said, we want people in prisons who committed violent crimes to be freed in exchange for I don't know if the United States would do that. I don't know. In any case, I hope that we will see the coming of the true Mashiach, and the words of Isaiah will be fulfilled. That lo yisa goya goycher v'lo yilmadu oid milchama, nation will not lift up sword against nation, neither will they learn of war anymore. That's a messianic prophecy. And may we see that unfold quickly in our days. Thank you so much.
Amen. Thank you, Rabbi, and thank you all for tuning in. It's been a great show. I look forward to seeing you same time, same place next Sunday, Hashem willing. You guys, this show will actually be edited and replay Tuesday nights, so be sure to check back in. If you missed the beginning of the show where the title was encapsulated, be sure to tune back in on Tuesday night. So, Rabbi, before we go, it'd be erroneous of me to not mention this. Rabbi Singer's books can be bought at outreachjudaism.org. 2-volume book set on the screen is available. The CDs are not, but the audio files are. Just go to his website, outreachjudaism.org, and click the free audio tab at the top. These are correlating chapter titles to the titles in the book, so it's easy to follow along. And there's a study guide. This is not an audio book. The CDs, the audio files came first. The book was written later to accompany those audio files. So if you don't have those, be sure to check those out. Rabbi, you should have a wonderful rest of your day, and we will catch up soon. You guys have a great week. Shalom, everybody. Take care. Peace. If you enjoy this channel and the content, and it has changed your life, or perhaps the life of a loved one or a close friend, would you please consider supporting this work? You can click this link and it'll take you directly to my website with the donate button. Or there's a Patreon link and a mailing address for snail mail if you would prefer. If you do donate, please do me a favor and leave me a phone number where I can contact you and thank you properly. I hope you all have a wonderful 2025. Shalom.